You're looking at a city on the brink of disaster. In a matter of days, an earthquake and fire will destroy almost everything you'll see in this film. It will kill or injure some of the people you'll see. An era will end. Of course, no one knew that on this fine day in April 1906. Pioneer filmmakers, the Miles brothers, were making an early commercial movie, intending to show off what they considered one of the greatest streets in the world to audiences in the East and in Europe. Clues in the film show it was professionally staged. For example, look closely and you'll notice there are only a few automobiles in the film, looping in and out of the shot over and over. The Miles brothers may have hired the automobiles to provide extra action and a touch of high technology to the movie. In 1906, horses still pulled the freight wagons and carriages that make up most of the traffic. The filmmakers first tried to film from an automobile, but it was too bumpy, so they rented a cable car like the ones we see passing us and attached a hand-cranked motion picture camera to the front. There were 5 cable car lines on market. Each line's cable cars were painted a different color so riders could see their car from a distance. There literally was a wrong side of the tracks, at least socially. North of Market to our left, Nob Hill, home to the grand mansions built by the Stanfords, Mark Hopkins, the Crockers, the Floods, and the nearly finished Fairmont Hotel. South of Market to our right, crowded communities of recent immigrants, mostly from Europe. The social boundary was that cable slot right in front of you. When you said something was south of the slot, people knew it was the working class part of town. We're coming up on 5th Street. Ahead to the left is the brand new Flood building, whose steel frame would help it survive the coming disaster. It still stands today as it did then, right next to the Powell Street cable car turntable. On the right, the Emporium, the largest department store in the West. Only its facade survived the earthquake and fire. But these surviving buildings were exceptions. Almost the entire commercial heart of San Francisco was leveled or gutted by the earthquake and fire, along with about half its housing stock. The most severe damage ever inflicted on a major American city. Cable cars were a San Francisco invention, of course, and for a short time were used in many cities, including New York and Chicago. But by 1906, cable cars were obsolete almost everywhere else, replaced by faster, larger electric streetcars. United Railroads, the private transit company, had been trying for years to switch Market Street to faster streetcars, but had been stopped by influential citizens who didn't want overhead electric wires on Market. Right after the earthquake, though, United Railroads bribed the entire Board of Supervisors to finally get its way. And so streetcars, like the one crossing in front of us from Ellis Street onto 4th Street, would soon take over Market Street too. But on this day, cable cars still ruled. 5 different cable car lines ran out Market, often running nose to tail like this. San Francisco was the largest and most sophisticated city west of St. Louis, and Market Street was one of America's most important commercial streets. People dressed up to visit it, and almost everyone wore a hat. You'll see hundreds of people in this film, but only one bare head. With automobiles still an expensive novelty, almost everyone rode the cable cars. The white one we're passing now ran all the way out Market to the suburb of Eureka Valley, now known as the Castro, and then over the hill to Noe Valley. The darker cable car here, actually painted red, ran out Haight Street to Golden Gate Park, which by 1906 was already world famous as a model for urban open space. We're coming up on Newspaper Row. Those pillars on the right mark the Call Building, the most ornate skyscraper in the city. Across 3rd Street on the right, the Examiner, and to the left, the Chronicle Building. The newspaper symbolized the power of San Francisco as a regional center. It was a visitor magnet for people from all over the West. To cater to those visitors and to San Franciscans wanting a special treat, United Railroads had 2 streetcars set up just for sightseeing. There's one crossing our path now. Sightseers got a 20-mile streetcar trip lasting 3.5 hours that took them to Mission Dolores, Golden Gate Park, and all the way around Land's End and its spectacular views of the Golden Gate, 30 years before the bridge was built, to reach the Cliff House and Sutro Baths, all for a quarter. On our right is the Palace Hotel, considered San Francisco's finest of that day. A few mornings from now, the world-famous tenor Enrico Caruso would be thrown out of his bed at the Palace by the earthquake. Later that day, despite valiant efforts of the hotel staff, the firestorm would turn this great hotel to ashes. Automobiles were pressed into service after the earthquake to distribute relief supplies and carry the injured. Vehicles of all kinds were essential to the relief and recovery efforts. Some of the cable cars that survived the fire were converted into temporary refugee housing, and some were moved out to the sand dunes at Ocean Beach, forming a community known as Carville that lasted for decades. Streetcars that quickly appeared on market after the quake were twice as fast as cable cars on flat ground, greatly expanding the reach of San Francisco's transit system. Fast streetcar service allowed the whole area west of Twin Peaks to rapidly develop into new neighborhoods, housing downtown workers. But that's more than 10 years in the future. At this moment, these kids are very much living in the present, showing off for the camera. We don't know exactly how it was mounted to the cable car, but clearly the camera was obvious to many people on the street. Others, though, seem oblivious, perhaps because they had no idea what a motion picture camera was. The 4 Miles brothers were among America's first commercial filmmakers. They had done a similar film the year before on a gravity railroad headed down nearby Mount Tamalpais. This film left San Francisco for New York the night before the earthquake on a train with 2 of the Miles brothers, just in time because they lost their Market Street studio in the fire. We're passing Sutter Street on the left. San Francisco's last horse car line ran from Lower Sutter to the Ferry building until 1913. We're crossing those horse car tracks now. A dozen years from this day, there will be 4 sets of electric streetcar tracks running 3 miles up Market, from the Ferries to Castro, making it one of the busiest transit streets in the world. Even in cable car days, Market Street transit service was amazing. That's a Hayes Street cable car going by, headed out to Stanyan. These were the biggest cable cars ever made, holding up to 130 passengers apiece. They were scheduled as close as 15 seconds apart in the peak commuting periods. Besides the Castro, Hayes, and Haight lines, this is another Haight car, Market Street cable lines branched off on Valencia to serve the Mission District, and on McAllister and Fulton all the way to 12th Avenue, serving the Western Addition and Inner Richmond, and an amusement park called The Chutes. Coming up now, another Castro car headed for its terminal in Noe Valley. Oh, watch out! Tight squeeze! Ooh, just made it! Why do something reckless like that? It might have been planned by the filmmakers. The kid in the back mugs for the camera. The man looking out from the front of the wagon seems in on the gag. He's a rarity in the San Francisco of 1906, where only 1/2% of the population was black. About 4% of San Franciscans then were of Chinese origin, most of them segregated in Chinatown. 1/3 of San Francisco's population back then was foreign-born, with the largest single group coming from Germany. And 95% of the population was white, a far cry from today's San Francisco, one of the most diverse cities in the world. Research from film historian David Keane has disproved the long-held belief that this film was shot in August 1905. New technologies allowed archivist Rick Prellinger to make a much clearer digital transfer than was possible before, including images in between the sprocket holes on the edges of the film. The film was originally silent, of course. Mike Upchurch contributed these sound effects. There's a Sutter Street horse car on the left, much slower than the Hayes cable car passing it. And there's a Valencia cable car right behind. The Ferry building clock ahead of us reads 3:16. One of those same automobiles makes another U-turn to loop around, and a horse car squeezes in front of us from California Street. Private transit companies had franchises from the city to use specific streets. United Railroads shared Lower California Street with a different cable car company and kept the obsolete horse car line going to protect its franchise rights. The California Street cable car line still runs today. If this were today, the Hyatt Regency Hotel would be on our left. To our right, the Southern Pacific Building, now known as One Market, would rise from the rubble of the quake in a few years. The last block of buildings on our right was rebuilt after the quake, but the whole block was cleared in the 1950s to build a plaza. And of course, the double-deck Embarcadero Freeway went up then too, blocking the view of the Ferry building for more than 30 years until another earthquake in 1989 made that elevated freeway crumble. We're looking, of course, at a famous facade. After San Francisco rebuilt, the Ferry building became the second busiest transit terminal in the world, with 400 electric streetcars swinging around a triple-track loop right here during a 90-minute evening rush hour, meeting ferries carrying people and vehicles from all over. But we're still in the cable car era, when they turned the cars the cable car way, on a turntable, this one with 2 tracks, powered by the cable itself. As we swing around to the north, we get a fleeting glance at what was then the busiest waterfront on the Pacific coast. Now we turn to face the future. We're at the end of the line, and a last look at the city that was.